chapters 20 through 23 today, I hope. We'll see if we get through them. It's kind of one of the more boring sections for me. Hopefully y'all get something out of it. I mean, I do. It's just not the challenge of 13, 14, and 19. The type antitype stuff is heavy. You'll see it a little bit in here. It's very obvious because verses in Revelation are quoted in this section. But it's not one of the harder ones. Next week, you don't want to miss. Next week is a lot of fun. I've put a lot of time in with my brother, getting every verse, getting all of the cross-references so that you can it will help you unlearn some stuff without getting into it a lot. And I think you'll see that it flows, it stays in context. Don't miss next week, it's a good one.
You need to bring your brother up here sometime.
Well, he's in Florida.
Yeah, yeah, double team. Or put him on the phone while he's going on. Y'all double team.
He's in his own class right now.
Zoom. Zoom, there you go.
Where is he?
Jacksonville, Florida. I know.
Oh, well.
I don't want to be paying his expenses.
No. All right, chapter 20, one slide here. This is, I think, short-term literal. I think this is where Isaiah strips down naked. He has, the Assyrians are fighting, they're taking over Ashdod. And everybody's kind of getting worried about it because Ashdod is like here to Fort Worth from Jerusalem. It's like due west from Jerusalem. And I think it's still there today. So the Assyrians are there. There's this big thing, you can read about it in the books of history and everything, where they're like, oh, let's go down to Egypt and get Egypt's help and stuff like that. Well, Isaiah is, no. He strips down naked and he walks around and he's like, this is what it's going to be like for the Egyptian and Ethiopian soldiers and army and stuff. They're not going to prevail. Don't go to them. He's talking for God here. Don't go to them. Don't turn to these outside forces. Turn to me. They're not going to be able to protect you. So what kind of that's the moral of the story. Don't turn to outside nations for help. Don't worship idols. Don't turn to other nations. Either one of those things are committing spiritual adultery with God. He does not want that. Turn to him. Hezekiah does it. They're saved from this Assyrian wrath. Hezekiah turns to God, not the Egyptians, and eventually get spared from that. And we all kind of know that.
So he walked around naked for 3 years?
3 years. Now, I don't know how naked that means.
I'd be frozen.
It's just kind of what the Bible says. I'm sure God was taking care of him in those type of manners. So I don't know if it was completely naked, but it might have been like it says his buttocks were showing.
So I guess nudist camps are okay after all.
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Then
But
that's where the term came from.
he's the one that started the trend. But that's the way they carried off the Ethiopian and Egyptian prisoners in chains. Is they didn't have anything. It was shameful. It was a shameful march. So you could go read about it in the books of history or whatever.
I got it right here.
Do you know what that-
There you go.
I mean, it was a common practice.
Sixth largest city.
It is a common practice to do that.
So, chapter 21. Now we have the burden of the desert of the sea. This is Babylon. This is Babylon, 539 BC. And I wanted to point out, because we're not really focused on the first century antitype here. He's really focusing on the type. And he kind of explains what he's doing in the 40s. If you go read this little Isaiah chapter 48 section, we'll save it for then, next year. But he's saying, I'm making these near-term prophecies, and I'm making these long-term prophecies, and he kind of says why and what he's doing. He's basically saying, I'm doing this type antitype thing. I'm giving you these short-term prophecies, and I'm showing you new things that will happen way off into the future. And he kind of explains. So you know that some of these prophecies that he's giving, like the Pekah and Reason. Y'all remember that from way early? Chapter 7, I believe, is where that is, Isaiah 7. That thing was about to happen. This chapter 20, that was about to happen. That was going to happen right then. So these are these short-term prophecies that he's talking about. And he says, so I make those, and then I also make these long-term prophecies. I'm doing all of these different time period prophecies so that you know this is coming from God the divine. That's what he's saying there. So you get this Babylon, and I think this one is a lot more accurate to Babylon. Going back to the NIV Study Bible on 13 and 14, it says that that is talking about Assyria. And I think it much more applies to Assyria. It's much more accurate for the type Assyria. It just calls it Babylon. Well, this one applies much more to the type Babylon under Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar, in that line here. And then when you get to Tyre here at the end, it also really applies to that Neo-Babylonian empire, that 70-year reign that they have. So you get a couple of clues in there that they're dealing out the plates for the party, they're having this party, stuff like that. And that's when this big judgment comes. And of course you find that with Belshazzar, with the writing on the wall, because he's having the party with all the utensils of the temple, the Jewish stuff, and that's when Cyrus sneaks in through the water gate and takes over the town. They talk about parts of the town were already taken, and Belshazzar still didn't even know it was happening. A lot of that is alluded to in here. You can read a lot about that. Verse 3. And I kind of wanted to point this out. This is not some conclusive thing. You can't say, oh, this definitely means Revelation is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. I'm not trying to take it that far. What I'm trying to show here is that Isaiah is having these pains as a woman that travaileth when he's witnessing this vision. And you have in Micah 4:10, you have the same thing. You have Jerusalem going through these pains, these labor pains, this sorrowful, excruciatingly painful thing to be going through witnessing. And then in Revelation you have, and she being with child travaileth in birth and pain to be delivered. You have it again. All I'm trying to show here is that this is a nationalistic judgment that is not at the end of time. Okay, because at the end of time, how quick is it? The twinkling of an eye, right? So is there going to be all of this?
You won't run back and pick up your clothes.
You're not going to do all the stuff
No
that...
labor pain.
There's no labor pains. It's instantaneous. You're not going to have time to react. The way I view it anyway, the way that I think most people in here view it. So this really helps you understand that this is a nationalistic judgment against Babylon here, the desert of the sea. There was a nationalistic judgment against Egypt and against Moab and Ammon and all the other ones, Edom and Assyria, Israel in the north. He constantly is giving these nationalistic judgments here that are not end of time. And what the part I do want to try to prove to you is that Revelation is the same. It's a nationalistic judgment. With this verse, I've been proven many other ways that I think it's Jerusalem in the transition from Judaism to Christianity. But this one verse I bring up to show this is not some end of time thing. It's the same thing that's been going on in Isaiah. It's a nationalistic event. Cry as a lion, depending upon what translation you use. I had to spend a little bit of time on this one, getting the right translation. But he's saying, cry as a lion. Like really yell out that you see. This is talking about the watchman here. Well, in Revelation 10, he's like, hey, when we see these things happening, we're going to be crying out as a lion. nationalistic judgment in both of them. This is Babylon. Revelation is Babylon. The judgment of Babylon the harlot, the mother of harlots, right? It's the same thing. 10. Verse 10. We're still in Isaiah 21. And we're 12 minutes into class and we're almost halfway done. I tell you, I think it's going to be a short class here. And I refuse to get into 24 because that one's going to be good. Israel, the grain of my threshing, I will save the grain, the corn, and burn away the chaff. You can go look up the threshing floor, the heart. That's kind of where the good stuff, the meat, the fruit of the grain, the stuff that you want to be using for consumption and bread and all of that, versus the chaff, the waste. And I think I grew up on cotton fields, cornfields, and so those combines, they're sitting there spinning all of that chaff away while all the wheat and corn is going into the machine. Too much time with cotton in my younger days.
Yeah.
Too much. That's cotton and hay baling. That's what I did. So this separating of this grain and this chaff is found here in this nationalistic judgment. And what I'm trying to get you to do is challenge your belief that is a end of time thing where the saints and the sinners will be parted right and left type thing. I think that will happen. I just don't think that's what this is talking about. I think this applies to the nationalistic judgment. He's going to save the remnant, right, when he does it to Jerusalem. He's going to destroy the wicked Jews there, Matthew chapter 23. That age is going to end. Matthew chapter 21, he's going to take away the kingdom from them, but the remnant will be saved. The ones that convert over to Christianity. That's the grain here. This is that nationalistic judgment that is not at the end of time. I want to read Daniel 2:35. Does anybody have that? I don't know that the translation matters. I'm not sure. Unless you're ESV, don't read me ESV stuff. You got ESV? Well, I'll kick you out of this class.
Daniel 2:35.
Yeah, Daniel 2:35.
Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, that not a trace of them was found. The stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth.
And we know Daniel 2:44, right? The coming of the Church of Christ. And that's what this is talking about here, is this threshing floor, all of the sinful ones of these nationalistic foes of God. That Daniel 2:35 is saying the same thing as the 10 burdens of of Isaiah. The enemies of God were going to be burned to chaff, whereas the good ones are going to become this mountain which cannot be moved. And I'm kind of combining Daniel 2:44 and Hebrews 12:28. If you remember that verse from the heavens and earth being shaken type thing. Chapter 21, the enemies of God and his people would be defeated. Now we see that a lot. We've been seeing that a lot in here. But two, it's also a warning to Judah and Jerusalem to don't become that enemy. Don't be doing what these oppressor nations, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, don't become the oppressor of my faithful, or I'm going to destroy you too. And what do? They become that oppressor nation. Acts 8:1. Matthew chapter 23. Oh man, we got like 3 more slides. Who's ready to go early? I'm starting to feel guilty here about not giving your... Should I stall?
Oh, my money's worth.
Yeah, you're going to have to give refunds on this one. And then you have You should know this quote from Revelation. You're here for a Revelation class. You're not here for an Isaiah class. Okay? And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, or fallen, fallen is Babylon. The translation makes it kind of weird. But really he's saying, it's fallen, Babylon is fallen. So this is the type. I think this section is specifically talking about the type. The one in 539 BC. He's using this type. He's not referencing Revelation. Revelation is talking about the antitype, Babylon, oppressor nation. And it quotes this verse like 4 times. Not this verse, this chapter. It quotes Isaiah chapter 21 like I think 4 times. Well, here it's pretty clear, and almost everybody universally agrees, it's talking about literal Babylon in 539 BC. It's not a controversial chapter. It's a nationalistic judgment. And I think that's what's happening in Revelation. You have a nationalistic judgment, except it's against Judah and Jerusalem. The ultimate target. What the Bible is about. The whole Bible. This peeled out, separated and apart people that the line of Christ was going to come through. And how they betrayed God, betrayed Christ, hung him on a tree, and the kingdom was taken away from them. You're going to get a lot of that next week. If I finish here in the next 1 minute, we might go ahead and start 24.
Let's do it.
So you see it. These verses right here, it's exactly the same wording. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. We're flying through these chapters. All right. The burden of Jerusalem, the burden of the valley of vision, and again, this is a for sure thing. This is the burden on Jerusalem itself here. We've been going through all of these other nations, but if you remember chapter 1, if you remember chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 5, he's just lambasting away against the Jews. He's going after them, that you're going to be desolate, you're going to be destroyed, everybody's going to be killed. He keeps going through that, the whole book. Well, then he takes this 10 burden section and starts talking about all these other nations. But I'm suggesting to you that he's not. He's really trying to teach the Jews, don't become that nation. Don't become what they're doing. Don't become the oppressors of my people. Don't worship idols. Don't be jerks to your neighbors. Even the chapters that we skipped, they're not so much type, antitype, but they're real short, so I didn't cover them. It's still Jews, and even us today, this is a little more application. Don't do those things, because he lists what they're guilty of, and he's like, I'm going to destroy them.
Well, earlier he said they were worse than Sodom. That they had already crossed over into worse.
Exactly. You in Jeremiah, he's like, I destroyed Israel, the north, because they played the harlot. You're worse. You play the harlot worse than they did. They're constantly compared to all of these bad guy nations. And he keeps telling them, God keeps telling them through the different prophets, that's you. And think if you're this elitist, holy, separated and apart Jew who thinks they're better than everybody else, religious-wise, and he's saying, no, you are worse than Sodom. You are worse than Israel. I'm going to destroy you. You're going to get this nationalistic judgment. The kingdom would be taken away, Matthew chapter 21, and given to the Christians, the Gentiles and the Jews who convert. So here we have straight up type. Antitype is both the same thing. It's just Jerusalem all the way. It would be a joyous, busy city. The leaders are going to become fearful and useless. They're not going to be able to fight God. All right, you almost don't even need to say that. But God shouldn't have to say a lot of things, and yet we still need to be hearing it. Judah was going to be spoiled. It was going to be tread down. You see that in Revelation, the treading down. He's going to do it with this Elam and what does the verse say? Media? What I forget what it says in there. It was basically the Assyrian forces at that time, because Assyria controlled those areas. If you go later on in time, they do not control those areas, but as of this, they do. The Valley of Vision would be full of the besieging Assyrian army. There in verse 7. You're going to do this really poor job of trying to get the city ready for this defense. It's not going to happen. Only I can defend you. Turn to me, is what he's saying there. When you read through this, talk about tearing down the houses to patch up the walls and that kind of stuff. And then you get to the kind of fun part. And here goes a real strong type antitype. And Gary, you want to explain this one? This is for you. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Gary says, is there another year again?
Here, come up here.
Yeah.
So they're going through all of this trouble in Isaiah's time. And they've got this guy, Shebna. I say Shebna, but again, whatever. He is this officer type that's kind of in charge. And you can read through these verses, but again, I don't really want to focus on the type so much. What Isaiah is saying is we need to replace him with Eliakim. You've got this bad leader of Judah and Jerusalem, literal, during Isaiah's time. He's replaced with Eliakim, a literal person there in Isaiah's time when all this Assyrian rampage is going on. Eliakim is trusted with the key to the house of David. And the key of the house of David I will lay upon his shoulders, so he shall open and none shall shut. He shall shut and none shall open. And it is a very clear type antitype. Who is this good leader, this good officer that comes in and has the keys so that he can open that no man can shut, and he can shut that no man can open? It's Christ. All right, it's a direct quote. In Revelation, the two books are the same thing. This is our 100th time to quote or reference Revelation. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these things saith he that is holy, he that is true, he that hath the key of David, he that openeth, and no man shutteth, and shutteth, and no man openeth. He's not talking about Eliakim, guys. He's talking about the antitype. Isaiah keeps using this type antitype prophecy. He's not done it for a couple of chapters. It's done later based on his type work. The Babylon chapter, the desert of the sea. But here it's very direct. And I wanted y'all to see, again, I like doing this. I find this stuff the day before I come up here, so I add it in. So that y'all can say, yeah, it's not just crazy core up here. Coming up, no. I saw that. This was written in the late 1800s. And I want y'all to read what this pulpit commentary group, there's a couple guys that got together 140 years ago to do this. You're going to think I wrote it. I did not. Sequel of the prophecy concerning Eliakim. This verse has been truly called an enigma. Because a lot of the commentaries try to go back and make it be about Shebna. Because, let's read the verse real quick. Sorry, I should have started with that. In that day, there's that clue that gives everything away. Saith the Lord of hosts, shall the nail that is fastened in the sure place be removed? Because it talks about Eliakim up in our previous verse. Eliakim will become a fastened nail, a strong nail that cannot be moved. He's for sure going to be the rock, the solid thing. In contrast to Shebna. But when it gets to verse 25, it says this nail that is fastened in the sure place is going to be removed. It's going to be cut down and fall, and the burden that was on it shall be cut off, for the Lord hath spoken it. And when you read that, if you're trying to read that about Eliakim in Isaiah's time, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. You're going to be thinking about it for days, trying to figure out what that means. It's type antitype. He switches over to the antitype. He switches over to Christ. So watch what pulpit commentary here says. It's not talking about Shebna being cut off. Because some people will try to make it so literal they go back to, well, we're talking about Eliakim for now, but now we're going to revert back. With the last verse in the chapter, we're going to all of a sudden revert back to Shebna. And it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't flow. It's out of context. And it doesn't deal with the type antitype that is clearly being used because of Revelation 3:7. So it's impossible to understand that it's Shebna. It just doesn't make sense. You will get people that say it. The nail that was fastened in a sure place can only refer to the nail said to have been so fastened in verse 23. Are we then to understand that Eliakim too will experience a reverse of fortune? Is he going to get cut off like Shebna would? But then all the force of contrast between Eliakim and Shebna would be gone. Because they're really turning these guys out to be polar opposite. But then if the same thing happens to both of them, it's not good, because Shebna's in a way cut off, replaced with Eliakim. And now Eliakim's good, but he gets cut off anyway? It doesn't make any sense. That's what this is saying. Is it not possible that the prophet, seeing in Eliakim a type of the Messiah, Christ, and becoming more and more messianic in his utterances, as he goes through this little paragraph, he starts off with the type, and then he just switches over to the antitype. And that's what I've been saying about almost every chapter we're doing. Okay, he starts off with Egypt, and he's not really talking about Egypt. He starts off with Babylon. He's not really talking about Babylon. He starts off with Eliakim. He's not really talking about Eliakim. He's talking about the antitype. Is it not possible that the prophet, seeing in Eliakim a type of the Messiah and becoming more and more messianic in his utterances, has ended by flat out forgetting the type altogether and being absorbed in the thought of the antitype? Type antitype is not my words. I did not come up with this thing. This is 140 years ago that this was written. This type antitype. It's in the Bible. This type, tupos, anti-tupos, is in the Bible. It's a biblical concept. You could go look up the words. I think we did that one time in here. Continuing with their little paragraph commentary. He, the nail, Christ, so surely fixed in his eternal place, would nevertheless be removed for a time, and then he would be cut down and fall. And you have this big, super strong messianic chapter, the most messianic chapter of the Bible, Isaiah chapter 53. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. Why? For the transgression of my people was he stricken. Pulpit commentary goes on to say, at the same time he would be cut off, the burden which the Messiah bore, he was bearing the sins of many, that would also fall, be cut off, be done away with. He would defeat it. Death would be swallowed up in victory. Because he hath poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors, and bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. in that day. Not the day of Shebna's fall, certainly. He's saying what I say about the green letters in that day. But some other. Is not the day that of Christ's earthly mission? Not early. When it seemed as if his people were about to acknowledge him, and his throne be established, but suddenly the Messiah was cut off. And you see that in that Daniel 70 weeks, when he's talking about the destruction of the temple and the city. He says, and so many weeks are going to go by, and then the Messiah will be cut off. And then you have another week later on. Another period of 7 years. Stricken for the transgression of his people, the burden that was upon it shall be cut off. The great burden upon the Messiah was the load of human sin which he had to bear. He himself bare our sins in his own body on the tree. 1 Peter 2:24. By death this burden was cut off. 1 John, 2 Corinthians, Ephesians, Colossians. You could go look up all these verses. These are not my words, but I agree with it 100%. So it's really cool when I stumble upon these commentaries that are like big on this type antitype stuff. Okay, so that is chapter 22. It's a good one because it's a very clear type antitype chapter with that Eliakim, with the keys to the kingdom. Because this is one of the easier ones because it's directly quoted. Christ is there or John is quoting it there in Revelation, talking about Christ.
Of course.
On back one?
No, if this is a good place to pause, I got an interesting idea.
Okay.
Okay, so one of the things that's been pointed out, rightly so, in your class is the number of times that this idea of the kind of, over and over again, each chapter of Isaiah sort of begins with this point of making this, we're talking about one thing and it switches into another, right? And there's a sort of value in seeing this idea repeated over and over again. We see it repeated over and over again. In chapter 21, you made a mention of remnant, and I was kind of curious about it, and went and looked up how many times were God's people delivered through a remnant?
Almost
a whole
all?
bunch.
Almost all?
Yeah, I mean like through Noah or through Gideon is a way of thinking about a remnant. No, that's too many. How about 300? Or whatever. If you start stacking up the remnants, it's over and over again.
Yes.
So here's an interesting thing. What's the point of the remnant? What's the point of being delivered through a remnant? And it was, here's a thought that I had you Googling. This is not something I've spent a lot of time thinking of up till now. But throughout the entire course of God's interaction with man, it's always been, I'm not going with the masses, I'm going to save the faithful few. Over and over and over again. And so we get this repeated idea of save through remnant, save through the faithful few, save through
seed type stuff.
Yeah. And so we get this sort of double press of type and antitypes. We also get this remnants thing sort of, they may not be related in that way, it just happens to be.
No, I think it is. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that it is stressed, like we've already stressed it a few times. And when we get to the 40s, and I think I talked to you about this because we were talking about, this was that whole Ketuvah thing, when she loses her heir. Jerusalem, the Jews lose their heir, but it goes in, man, she has this shame of not having these kids, these ones to pass on the kingdom to. But he's like, don't worry, for the ones that are faithful, I'm going to extend the tent unto the Gentiles, and then Gentiles are going to be adopted in. So we're going to go through it again in another way to illustrate it. So it's not just how many times it's repeated and how many times through history it's repeated. He explains it a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
So you get you get this remnant, you get this the whatever this chapter was saying. I can't remember what it said. And then you get the adopted ones coming in. And then at that point, it becomes as the number of sands of the sea, or on the beach, or whatever. whatever, it becomes so many, it's not a little bitty remnant anymore. Because Christianity would go boom. Yes, exactly. Last chapter, 23. Tyre. This is an interesting one. Tyre is up here. Where exactly, I don't know. It's this little island type nation. You can go there today still.
It's actually connected to the land now.
It's who did that? Anybody? No, not you. Not you.
Fine.
Not my history guys.
When Alexander-
That's correct.
Yeah.
Alexander the Great, when he comes in, nobody could really conquer that. Nebuchadnezzar kind of does, but he really, I think, just kind of waits him out or whatever, which we're about to talk about. But Alexander's like, no. Alexander's so impressive in everything he did militarily. He just builds this land bridge out there and conquers them. I'm like, no.
Do you know why?
I don't know what you're asking, but I know the history pretty well.
Well, I know, but you know why he decided to build those two moles out there to get to the island? Because they killed his messengers and insulted his mother.
Oh. They didn't mess around with this guy.
Now,
This guy, I always like to say Alexander, and when I go through my Daniel 11 stuff, I like to, Alexander's one of my more favorite ones because I think he's real stupid in that he kept claiming that the gods were telling him to do this, and the gods would tell him how to do this strategy, and I'm like, that dude didn't know it, but he was right. Because God, not plural, not his gods, but God, the Father, was divinely using him. And when he even came up to Jerusalem, when they didn't really conquer Jerusalem, they didn't fight him, the priests come out and they start showing him the Old Testament. They're like, hey, we've been waiting on you. We've been waiting for this great Grecian to come. And Alexander's like, yeah, feed my ego, baby. Your God has prophesied me. So he doesn't make a mistake until he's completed his mission, right? He spreads Greek throughout the known world. And when he's done accomplishing what nobody else in history had ever done before, he conquers more than my map can show. Okay? And he does it in an insanely short amount of time. He's just moving with rapid speed. So Alexander's constantly described as a very fast one. All of the imagery is associated with describing him as speed. One of my favorite guys in there, I hadn't got into it in a while, but he comes up and after he dies and it spreads out to the four generals after that, that's also a lot of fun because it gets real confusing. But the Ptolemies come from that. Cleopatra we know. What's that lady's name? Liz Taylor? Mm-hmm. Right?
yeah.
Yeah, Liz Taylor is from Ptolemy's line. One of Alexander's generals. Pretty sure the actress is too. I don't know that. Alright, so Tyre is this big, massive commercial trade center. And when Babylon takes over, they kind of lose their luster. There's some skirmish in there with Nebuchadnezzar somewhere. I didn't get into it a whole lot. But they kind of fall out of favor commercially with the world during this Babylonian reign. Well, that Babylonian reign is about, 609 to 539, I think. I think it's a 70-year reign here. And once they go away, Isaiah he's kind of predicting it. Because this is about 100 years before it actually happens. And Isaiah is saying, hey, you're going to lose this World Trade Center status. But after that 70 years are over, you're going to, and if you read the section, it's kind of weird because it's like you're going to get to play the harlot again. But he's talking about it in a very good way. It's real interesting to me. He's saying, yeah, you're going to get to play the harlot. You're going to be joyous. You're going to get to help people worship God. All these things. So when he's saying you're going to get your hire back, you're going to get to be able to sell your goods to all of the nations of the world again, meaning to a Jew, that would be this spiritual fornication type stuff. But to Tyre, it was not. They God's people at this time. So, and it's, I don't think it's really talking about religion at all. I think it's strictly talking about commerce here. And they would become this port city again that traded with all the world.
Is this kind of the same time period as Ephesus being such a big port and important?
You want to answer that? I don't know the answer to that question.
Which time?
When does
I
Ephesus
said,
become?
is this the same time period when Ephesus was such a major?
Ephesus would be Rome type stuff.
At Isaiah's time, no.
No.
Okay.
Ephesus, I think, is more
Or,
Gaul, Rome, not Gaul, but Galatia,
Yeah.
New Gaul.
Yeah, it was later.
Yeah, so you're talking Roman type stuff, I think. I think Ephesus doesn't really become a super modern civilized thing until, I think, the Roman Empire. Do not quote me on that at all. I'm gonna now go look this up when I go home. We'll do class corrections next time. Okay?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
At least in my translation, on 15, I do have a now in that day, Tyre will.
Mm-hmm.
So are we talking about first century?
So I kind of think there's a little bit of overlap here when you start getting to the end of this this Tyre thing. They start becoming. Let me read the last verse here.
Okay. I mean, I can read it for you.
Yeah, read the last verse of
18?
I think it's 18.
Okay. Her gain and her gain and her harlot's wages will be set upon to the Lord. It will not be stored up or hoarded, but her grain will become sufficient food and choice attire for those who dwell in the presence of the Lord.
And I think you have, and what I have here is you have that in the first century, that kind of stuff really starts happening because after that Babylonian captivity, they start switching over to being very allied. They go from allied to being very allied. They help rebuild the temple.
Right.
Ezra 3, okay? And then you have examples of the Tyrians, I think that's how you say it. In Mark, Josephus talks about Tyre starting to become part of God's people. Acts mentions Christians there in Tyre. So I think it's the same thing as the previous one, where it's type, and then we kind of get down to the end and it's really starting to get to that first century antitype type thing.
So it's kind of like a fade in and out kind of thing? Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
And what I don't know for sure, but that in that day, to me is my first clue. And again, I've always said I don't know that that's exactly right. But all of these commentaries that I've been reading say the same thing about the phrase "and in that day."
Right.
They're like, and that means messianic times.
Right.
So Jesus makes a specific reference to Tyre.
Mm-hmm.
So when he's in Galilee and he's doing the miracles up there and they won't have him,
Is that this one?
or maybe, where he ends up saying, if I'd have done these miracles that I'm doing in my hometown, in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented in sackcloth and ash. You know, saying...
They would have accepted me.
Correct.
Whereas you Jews are not.
Right.
Yeah. I think that goes along with it. I think that's their commerce and their goods is that is that verse.
Okay.
What you're talking about there. That their goods, their stuff would be used for the Lord. Their playing the harlot would be a good thing for God's faithful, God's people.
Well, like Christianity spreads through trade, and Tyre was like
Epicenter.
was the epicenter of trade in the Mediterranean world, and Christianity travels with the ships. So
Yeah. That's my guess. That's my guess. Okay. Now, I could also be wrong where there's a few and in that days that don't have anything to do with first century. I still hold that that's possible because I have not gone and looked at every single and in that day in the Bible.
Well, maybe it's like a key, like, hey, at the end of my thought here, it'll
Yeah.
transfer between type to antitype.
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of think that's what he's doing, and I think that's kind of what the commentary that I was reading on the previous one about Eliakim, he's like, they're saying it 150 years ago. Yeah, and he's transitioning to the antitype, and then at the end, he just flat out forgets the type, and it's just strictly talking about the antitype.